Vin Diesel chuckles at Graham Norton after being ejected from his show. Section 1. What unfolds when one of cinema's most formidable action icons walks into what he believes is a light-hearted late-night conversation, only to find the host has been laying a trap for months. What you're about to see is among the most jaw-dropping exchanges ever witnessed on nighttime television. Vin Diesel doesn't just unmask Graham Norton's hidden agenda, he does it with a laugh so piercing it echoes long after the moment ends. Be sure to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments, because this tale only intensifies with each passing line. Backstage at the Graham Norton show, the atmosphere was unusually subdued that Thursday evening. Vin Diesel sat in a sleek leather armchair, his imposing silhouette calm as he flicked through his phone, oblivious to the storm waiting just beyond the curtains. His publicist, Sarah, paced near the dressing room door, her nerves barely contained. "Vin, are you certain you want to go through with this appearance tonight?" she asked, her voice etched with unease that had simmered beneath the surface all week. "Why wouldn't I?" Vin looked up, his resonant tone laced with that trademark assurance. "Graham and I go way back. We've danced this dance before." "That's exactly why I'm uneasy," Mary murmured under her breath. A stagehand knocked lightly and entered. "Mr. Diesel, they're ready for you in 5. Vin rose, adjusting the sleeves of his black shirt and smoothing the silver chain around his neck. "Let's go light up the room." As he strode toward the stage entrance, Mary reached for his arm. "Vin, please, something's off tonight. Graham's been asking strange things during the prep calls. Personal things. Not about the movie." Vin halted, his expression sharpening. "What kind of things?" "Questions about the rumors, Vin. The ones we've worked hard to keep buried." Before he could answer, the same assistant returned. "Mr. Diesel, it's time." The signature show music blared through the studio as Vin stepped onto the set. The crowd burst into applause, their enthusiasm filling the space. Graham Norton stood by his signature red chair, grinning that familiar grin that had charmed millions, but tonight, there was something icier in his gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the one and only Vin Diesel." Graham's voice thundered through the studio. Vin waved warmly to the audience, his usual charisma lighting up the stage. He approached the guest chair, exchanging a handshake with Graham that lingered a beat too long, both men silently taking the other's measure. "Vin Diesel, wonderful to have you," Graham said as they Saturday. "You're looking fantastic." "Appreciate it, Graham. Always good to be here." The audience settled, and Graham reclined in his seat, that smile never faltering. "So, Vin, let's talk about this new film. Fast and Relentless 15, is it?" Vin laughed, his deep, familiar chuckle rolling through the studio. "Close, Graham. It's Fast X, Part 2. But hey, who's still counting, right?" Right. Graham chuckled. "I've got to ask, how do you keep coming up with new ways to break every rule of physics in these films?" "Well, Graham, it all comes down to family," Vin replied, comfortably slipping into familiar territory. "When there's that connection, on screen and off, there's no limit to what you can do." Graham nodded, though his smile now seemed just a touch strained. "Family. You talk about it a lot. Some would say, incessantly." Something in Graham's tone made Vin's gaze sharpen. "I wouldn't say incessantly. I'd say it comes from the heart." "From the heart," Graham echoed, slowly, as if tasting the phrase. "That's interesting, because I've heard some things about your own interpretation of heartfelt family values." The studio fell into a hush. Even the camera operators paused, sensing the tension building in the air. Vin's jaw tensed ever so slightly. "What exactly are you getting at, Graham?" Graham leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I'm just curious about the contrast between the wholesome image you project and some of the talk floating around this town." "Talk?" Vin said, his tone now flat and cautious. "Oh, come now, Vin. Let's not play coy. Stories about your behavior behind the scenes. How you interact with the crew. The demands. The outbursts. The ultimatums." Vin remained motionless, his voice dropping to a low, steely whisper. Graham, I suggest you tread very carefully with this line of questioning. But Graham had clearly crossed the threshold. Why should I tread lightly? This is my platform, then. My stage. And I believe my viewers have a right to know who they're really applauding. A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. This wasn't the playful back and forth they'd come to expect. Your audience, Vince said slowly, came here for a good time, not to watch you ambush someone who thought you were a friend. Friend? Graham gave a dry laugh, entirely devoid of warmth. Is that what we were? Because friends don't threaten to bury each other's careers over a few light-hearted jabs. What exactly are you accusing me of? Graham reached beneath his desk and retrieved a worn manila folder. Oh, I think you know precisely what I'm referring to. Would you like a refresher? The folder landed on the desk with a muted thud that seemed to reverberate across the hushed studio. Vin's eyes flicked from Graham's face to the folder and back again, his expression carved from stone. Go ahead, Graham, Vin said, his voice as calm and solid as granite. Open it. Graham's fingers paused for a heartbeat before lifting the cover. This, he said, holding up the first page, is a collection of grievances submitted by crew members over the past 3 years, complaints that, curiously, vanished from the official logs. Curiously, Vin repeated with an arched brow. Or perhaps they disappeared because they were fiction. Badly written ones. Were they? Graham said, pulling out a document. Because according to this report from the set of Fast N, you allegedly hurled a chair at a cameraman who accidentally caught your scalp in a close-up. Vin's chuckle rumbled low in his chest. A chair? Graham, take a good look at me. If I threw a chair at someone, they wouldn't be filing a complaint. They'd be filing a medical claim. A few tentative laughs rippled through the audience, but Graham wasn't backing off. And what about the incident where you supposedly confined a screenwriter in a trailer for 6 hours because he refused to rewrite a single line? Now that, Vin said, reclining slightly, that one's actually true. Graham blinked in surprise. His eyebrows shot up. So you're admitting it? I'm admitting I take character integrity seriously. When some studio puppet tries to put words in Dom Toretto's mouth that undermine everything he represents, then yes, I have a problem. So you locked the writer in a trailer? I had a prolonged, uninterrupted conversation with him. In a private setting, where creativity could thrive. Graham sifted through more papers, emboldened by what he believed was a turning point. What about the accusations that you've used your sway to have fellow actors removed from major productions? Vin's posture stiffened. His jaws set like concrete. Now you're venturing into treacherous waters, Graham. Treachery for whom? You. The two locked eyes across the desk. The tension could have snapped steel. Graham's hand trembled slightly as he flipped another page. My sources claim you had Tyrese Gibson dropped from consideration for 3 blockbuster roles because he publicly criticized your creative authority over the Fast and Furious saga. Vin rose slowly from his seat, his massive frame towering above Graham's desk like a thundercloud. The air in the studio thinned as the audience fell utterly silent. Your sources, Vin said, voice low and sharp as a blade. Who exactly fed you this, Graham? That's not relevant. It's very relevant, Vin said, stepping forward. Because whoever whispered this in your ear has a motive, and you're too blinded by your own ego to see the strings being pulled. Graham's mask of confidence cracked for the first time. I'm smart enough to know when someone's trying to threaten me on my own set. Threaten? Vin let out a humorless laugh, colder than ice. If I were threatening you, you'd know. What I'm doing now is giving you an education. Enlightening me? About what? About how you're being used, manipulated by people desperate to drag me down, and you're letting them, all for a few cheap headlines. Graham rose now too, attempting to match Vin's presence. He came up several inches and 100 pounds short. No one's manipulating me, Vin. I did my own investigation. Your investigation? Vin picked up the folder, thumbing through the pages like they were a child's coloring book. These files, where did they come from? That information is privileged. Privileged, Vin repeated with a knowing nod. Let me guess. About 6 weeks ago, Someone reached out to your producers, claimed they had inside knowledge, promised a segment that would go viral. Graham's face turned ghostly pale. How did I know? Vin tossed the folder back onto the desk with a loud slap, scattering its contents across the polished wood. Because they pitched this exact story to 3 other shows before you. The difference is those shows had the brains to verify it. The studio was frozen in place. Even the camera crew had stopped moving, paralyzed by the drama unfolding before them. You want the truth about that screenwriter? Vin's voice carried weight, each word deliberate. He wasn't trapped in a trailer. He was in my motorhome. We collaborated for 6 hours straight to create dialogue that honored both the character and the story. And when we were done, he shook my hand and said it was the most rewarding creative session he'd ever had with the lead actor. Graham's mouth opened, but no sound came out. And Tyrese. Vin continued. Tyrese didn't get cut from those films because of me. He breached his contracts by making internal matters public. The studio wanted to cut him entirely, but I fought to keep him in the Fast family. He leaned in, placing both hands firmly on Graham's desk. The wood groaned under the pressure. So once again, Graham, who gave you this folder? I can't. You can't what? Disclose your informant, or admit you've been turned into a mouthpiece for someone else's vendetta. Graham fumbled with the scattered pages, visibly shaken. Even if a few details were exaggerated, he muttered, that doesn't necessarily mean. Doesn't mean what? Vin's voice sliced through the silence. That you haven't just sabotaged your own career on live television? Graham looked like he'd just seen his own obituary. The color had drained entirely from his face. You know the saddest part, Graham? Vin's tone softened with a tinge of regret. I actually liked you. I thought you were one of the rare ones in this business. Someone who believed that entertainment should uplift, not destroy. Vin, maybe we should. Maybe we should what? Cut to a break? Pretend none of this unfolded? Snip it all in post and hope no one notices? Vin shook his head slowly, the weight of the moment settling like thunderclouds overhead. No, Graham. You chose to play this out live, so we're going to finish it live. Graham cast a desperate glance toward his producers in the wings, but they stood frozen in place, stunned like the rest of the studio. Here's what's going to happen next, Vin said, his voice calm, authoritative, undeniably in command. You're going to look into that camera and tell your audience who handed you that folder. You're going to explain how you were manipulated into staging this ambush. And then, you're going to apologize. I'm not apologizing for doing journalism, Graham said, clutching what dignity he had left. Journalism? Vin's laugh burst from him, low, rich, and terrifying in its sincerity. Graham, this isn't journalism. This is a smear campaign. And you? You were foolish enough to be the one holding the knife. The audience sat frozen, some cringing in their seats, others unable to tear their eyes away from the chaos unfolding before them. You want to know who really pulls the strings in this town, Graham? Vin asked, taking a step forward. It's not actors like me. It's the puppet masters who convinced you that burning someone's name on live television would make good ratings. Graham's face contorted, caught between denial and dread. You think you can just stroll onto my stage and threaten me? This is my show. My platform. You're just passing through. A guest, Vin echoed slowly, that dangerous smile returning. You know what, Graham? You're absolutely right. I am just a guest, which means I can walk off at any moment. Good. Then go. But Vin didn't budge. Instead, he reached inside his jacket and withdrew his phone. Before I do, I think your viewers deserve to hear some truths about who's really pulling strings tonight. Graham's eyes widened. What are you doing? I'm calling someone who's been waiting for you to make this exact mistake. He held the phone up to the audience so they could see the call being placed. You can't just make calls during a live broadcast. Graham protested. Watch me. The line connected, and Vin placed the phone on speaker. Marcus, you there? A crisp, composed voice echoed through the studio. I'm watching, Vin. This is unfolding even better than we anticipated. Graham's face turned the color of parchment. Who? Who is that? Graham Norton. Meet Robert Carlos, Chief Legal Counsel for Universal Pictures. Marcus, say hello to the man who just attempted to destroy one of your biggest intellectual properties on primetime television. Good evening, Graham, Marcus said, voice like sharpened steel. We need to have a serious conversation. Graham looked around in a panic. I don't understand what's happening. What's happening, Vin said, settling back into his chair with deliberate ease, is that you've stumbled into a trap, one that's been 6 months in the making. A trap? Graham's voice cracked audibly. Vin nodded subtly, and a moment later, the studio's giant screen lit up with documents, emails, transaction records, and NDAs. You see, Vin began, when someone starts shopping forged stories about a major star, word spreads fast. And when they target shows with a reputation for gotcha journalism, well, the legal team takes notice. Graham blinked at the screen, eyes darting across the incriminating material. Those emails, Graham, Vin continued, show precisely who's been feeding you this narrative, and why. Marcus chimed in again. The source of your exclusive was Patricia Martinez, formerly of Paramount's development team. She was terminated half a year ago for siphoning funds from multiple productions. Graham's knees buckled slightly as he collapsed into his seat. No, that can't be. Oh, but it is, Vin said, pulling out a second phone, this one displaying a voice recording app, and I've been documenting every moment of this conversation. I suspect Patricia will be very curious to hear how enthusiastically you jumped aboard her vendetta. You're recording this? Graham, this is live TV. Everything's being recorded, Vin replied, amused. The real question is, how much of your career are you willing to set on fire to protect someone who used you as a pawn? Graham glanced helplessly at the mess of papers on his desk, then back at the damning evidence projected behind them. I didn't know. I swear, I had no idea. You didn't know, Vin said, his voice turning ice cold, because you didn't want to know. You wanted a scandal. Something sensational. Something that would stir up controversy and drive your numbers. You didn't care whether it was real. That's not fair. Fair. Vin rose again, and this time he seemed to fill every corner of the room. You want to talk about fair, Graham? Let's talk about the 20 crew members whose names you were willing to tarnish with forged accusations. Let's talk about Tyrese, who nearly lost everything because you couldn't be bothered to check your facts. Marcus's voice pierced through the silence. Graham, will require a public retraction. Tonight. On this show. I won't retract anything until I verify the... You're in no position to stall, Vin interrupted, his tone now unflinching. While you were busy trying to trap me in a spectacle, I was preparing a case. A comprehensive case. One that lays bare a trail of deceit, negligence, and collusion with known criminals. Criminals? Patricia's just a thief, Graham, Vin said, voice low and resolute. She's been blackmailing senior studio executives for over a year. And now, whether you meant to or not, you've become part of her scheme. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning in the dead silence that followed. The audience was frozen in disbelief. Graham looked around for help, but his producers, once so sure of their host, were now staring at him with expressions that ranged from shock to thinly veiled contempt. What do you want from me? Graham asked, barely audible. I want the truth, Vin replied simply. I want you to admit that you were manipulated. I want you to retract the lies you aired tonight. And I want you to apologize. Graham said nothing for a long while. He stared down at his hands as if he could find a way out written in the lines of his palms. When he finally raised his head, his eyes glistened, not quite crying, but not far from it either. I'm sorry, he said, voice cracking as he looked at Vin. Don't apologize to me, Vin replied, unwavering. Apologize to them. He gestured to the audience. Apologize to the people who trusted you to tell them the truth. Graham turned toward the crowd, his voice barely more than a whisper. I owe all of you an apology. I allowed the hunger for a compelling story to override my better judgment. I failed to verify my sources, and I became a pawn in a vendetta against an innocent man. Louder, Vin said firmly. Graham cleared his throat and spoke with renewed clarity. Vin Diesel is not the man I portrayed him to be tonight. The claims I made were founded on fabricated documents provided by someone with a grudge. I was wrong, and I am deeply sorry. Vin gave a single approving nod. Good. Now one last thing. What is it? You're going to donate your fee from tonight's show to a nonprofit that supports entertainment workers who've been ostracized for speaking out against abuse. Graham's nod was small, almost childlike. Okay. And Graham, Vin continued, his tone softening slightly, next time someone hands you a story that sounds too perfect, remember this moment. With that, he tapped the screen of his phone and ended the call with Marcus. Then he turned toward the main camera and addressed the nation with the ease of a man who had nothing to hide. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight has been a lesson for all of us. The truth may not always dazzle like a lie, but it holds something far more valuable: integrity. He turned once more to Graham. I believe my work here is done. As Vin strode toward the exit, Graham called after him in desperation. Vin, wait. How did you know? About Patricia? About the trap? Vin stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back with a small, knowing smile. Graham, I've been in this industry for 3 decades. You learn to spot the vipers before they strike. And with that, he walked off stage, leaving Graham Norton seated alone behind his desk, surrounded by a mess of scattered papers and the hollow echo of his unraveling credibility. For a moment, the studio remained completely still. Then, from the back row, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slowly, others joined in. Within seconds, the entire studio erupted in applause, not for Graham, but for the man who had just delivered a masterclass in standing firm, speaking truth, and dismantling deceit. So there you have it. The night Vin Diesel didn't just withstand a televised ambush. He turned it into a stunning example of grace under fire and the power of preparation. What did you think of how Vin handled Graham's interrogation? Was he too severe, or did Graham reap exactly what he sowed? Drop your take in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove, in Hollywood, the truth really is stranger than fiction.